Welcome everyone to Seek, Go, Create. This is your host, Tim Winders. Got a great conversation today. Before we get any further, I want to remind you of one thing I'd love for you to do, and that is go to seekgocreate.com/book. That is where you can find out all about the novel. Yeah, you heard me right. I've written a novel, kind of surprising, leadership coach and all this stuff, but for some reason I had a novel in me, and actually I've got a lot more. This is my debut novel, and depending on when you're going to that site, seekgocreate.com/book, you'll either be able to get a copy of the first chapter for free, download, just get a feel for if you like the writing and the style and the story. Or if it's after the release of the book, you'll be able to find out about where you can find the book and all about it there. So go check that out and let me know how you like it and read up on it and just have fun with it. I know I almost said I had fun writing it. I enjoyed the writing process. I'll just say it that way. It was a lot of work, but go do that for me. And with that, we're going to dive in today. Today, I have Ann Huntington Sharma as our guest. Ann is the president and a board member of Huntington Learning Center, and that's the nation's leading tutoring and test prep provider. So that'll be some fun conversation. She's a business leader, collector, philanthropist, producer, and creator. Like I said earlier, quite possibly a Renaissance woman here. So I'm excited to talk to her. Ann, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Thanks so much, Tim. It's awesome to be here.
I'm glad you're here too, and we're going to have some fun today. Before I get started, though, I want to ask you my question, and that is, we see each other digitally or live or whatever, and we bump into each other, and we're chit-chatting, and I say, Ann, what do you do? What do you typically tell people?
Well, over the past 18 months, I've made the impossible possible. So you gave the bio. I'm the president and board member of Huntington Learning Center. I'm a problem solver. I'm a collaborator. I'm a creator. I'm a daughter, a wife, sister. So what do? I make things happen. And I do it with a smile. And I make sure that as long as I know what the problem is, we can find a solution. That's what I do.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot there, Ann. But the first thing that popped in my head is, have you always been a make things happen person? Like from the womb, like you mentioned, you were daughter, did you come out and just say, all right, here's what we're going to do. Really? I've got a granddaughter that seems to be that way too. What was that like as a child, and when did you first become aware that you were a problem solver, a get things done person?
Well, I decided to come out of my mom's womb about 2 months early. So I really wanted to get things done from the get-go. So here she thought she was going to have a July baby.
So you're 2 months. You're 2 months ahead of most people anyway. You're like in the future already.
There you go. So from a young age, I've always been I've always liked to interconnect, to connect and network and see how things can be solved. Think outside the box, but understand that there might be a box. So within confines, and then pushing those boundaries. And I started that at an early age.
So tell me a little bit about, one of the things I'm always intrigued about, and we discuss here on the show, is kind of how people come to be in the roles, positions, assignment is a word we use a lot here, that they are in. And sounds like you were a hard charger. I love the humor of you're 2 minutes ahead of schedule. 2 months ahead of schedule right out of the gate. But let's just we're not going to go deep into it, but let's just give a little bit of Ann growing up, the schooling, the type of education you got before we start getting into the business and all that you're doing right now.
Sure.
Catch us up and tell us, Ann, the early years.
And the early years. Wow, it sounds like we're brainstorming for my novel. I look forward to reading your novel, Tim. So there's a plug for your novel.
Thank you.
And I will definitely be looking at that chapter that I can preview. So the early years, and wow, well, you told me we had 60 minutes. So I'll do the truncated version. The early years, I grew up in northern New Jersey, outside New York City. And I grew up in a loving family. My parents have actually just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, which is no small feat. So I grew up in a wonderful family surrounded by family, friends, went to school locally, and then I went to college in upstate New York and received a liberal arts education. From there, I started my career in the art industry at an auction house, and then started my own art curatorial and production company. And then I had a conversation with those loving parents who actually founded Huntington Learning Center 44 years ago. They're the co-founders. So at work, they're Eileen and Ray, of course, their mom and dad during holidays. And we had a conversation, and about 8 years or so ago, I came on board at Huntington. So I took your question, the early years, and I fast forward it to today. That said, who I am, I'm the same person I was when I was born in May, many years ago, smiling, trying to figure it out, lighthearted, genuine, and someone who really wants to make a difference. And that's what I did when I was a child. I was always trying to bring different groups together. And that's what I do as an adult and a professional. I try and collaborate and to create as much as possible.
Right. And so the Learning Center, Huntington Learning Center, sounds like a family business. How long has it been in existence? And it sounds like you stepped into it at some point. How long has it been in existence, and at what stage was it at when you stepped in?
So Huntington was founded in June of 1977. I also joke, though it's true, I'm center number 17. So my parents either opened a center or had a child. I have one older brother. And so I started with Huntington as a student. So that will go back to those early years. So I was a student at Huntington Learning Center, saw firsthand the skills that are able to be accomplished, the confidence, the motivation. I also was in quintessential 90s campaigns, marketing campaigns and commercials. And then from there, I went on and did my own thing. It was very important, especially being in a family business, to have a boss who doesn't have the same last name or maiden name. So it was important for me to have experience outside the family company. And then about 8 years or so ago, my parents and I sat down and we had a conversation. I came on board first as a consultant to focus on marketing and a rebranding campaign. And then very early on, I dove deep and I went through our training program, and I became full-time. So that's the genesis of how it started and where I am today within Huntington.
So I want to talk about education, and also want to have some discussion about your experience and background in art and philanthropy and collecting. But anytime I've been involved with family businesses, I consult, coach, work with people that have been in and around family businesses. There are so many beautiful things about a business where you're working with someone who you also have relation to, but then there's also challenges there. And maybe just for the sake of the listener, I'm not asking you to air out any dirty laundry or anything like that, but could you cover some things and maybe even some tips? Because I actually love what you said, that you had to kind of make your own way before you stepped back in. It wasn't like there's this position for Ann that we're holding and no one else can get it. That's kind of my way of wording it. But can you talk a little bit about the great things, the good things about family business, and then maybe some of the potential challenges and pitfalls from
Sure.
what you've observed? I think that'd be valuable to a lot of people.
Absolutely. And it's a dynamic industry, family business. And I think more and more people need to discuss the challenges / opportunities, what makes sense, what doesn't. It's really important to have honest and clear conversations with the family. Now, in my instance, it was my parents or the co-founders. In some family enterprises, businesses, it could be aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. So there could be multiple generations. So within family business, there are a couple terms. One term is generation one. That's the founders. Generation two is the next generation, and generation three, etc. So I'm known as generation two. One of the beautiful things, and you use that word beautiful, Tim, is that there's such alignment in terms of fulfilling the mission and the vision. And within Huntington, whether you're a co-founder, whether you're a Huntington, whether you are a franchisee, we're a franchising company, everyone understands that mission. And our mission is to give every student the best education possible. Now, as a family member and as the daughter of the founders, and seeing all the positives and negatives in my 37 years of existence, it hasn't all been smooth sailing. As owners of a company, you have to make sure you make payroll. You have to make sure that you pay your bills. You have to make sure that you are doing what is right for your employees, for the customers, etc. So there's a heavy burden. So without having that burden, one might not understand the true heaviness of it. That said, when you're aligned and you understand that vision and there's trust, there's integrity, anything is possible. And I think a testament to the success of how I work with my parents is that we have a very, very strong bond and we trust each other. There is inherent love. And I've told them over the years, as my parents, you are more important to me than as my colleagues. And I would never want to sever that, which has been very difficult. And so I'm not one to air dirty laundry. That said, family businesses might not be right for everyone. That said, you could be a family of business, a business and family, where multiple people are doing different things. So just because you're not in the business does not mean you're less or more than the others. It's just a choice. And in some instances, there are some negative connotations, and others there are positives. But at the end of the day, regardless of what the challenge is, the obstacle, the quote unquote dirty laundry, that integrity, that mission, that alignment is something that is truly, truly priceless.
That's good. And, there's a word you used. I wrote down the word trust. And I think a lot of people, I don't know if this would be a correct statement or not, but I'll just say it. I think a lot of people probably make this assumption that you can trust family, but I don't think that's the case. And I think in a lot of people that may not admit that they have communication challenges, issues, and all that, I think that's where a lot of any type business can get off track, but definitely family business. So what it sounds to me like, and I there's a word, actually, I think it's a commandment. I actually heard Billy Graham say this not long ago, that he was interviewed back in 1969 by Woody Allen, of all things. I was watching this clip, and Woody Allen, in kind of his snarky way, said, "What's your favorite commandment?" And he says, "Well," he goes, "I like them all, but honor your father and mother is one that's pretty high on my list." And it caused an interesting dialogue. But I can tell by the way you speak and your tone that you have a lot of honor for your parents. And I'm not going to ask you to agree or disagree. It appears that you honor them. And I think in a family business, that's important. But I think it's important in life. And anyway, just me preaching here, I think that's one of the things we've lost in a lot of the worlds we're in. So were your parents, were they business people or were they educators? I guess I'm almost wanting to know, going back to the early 70s or the 70s.
Let's do it.
Yeah. What were they teachers? Both my parents were educators. My dad was an educator. My mom was a parapro, I guess they would call it now, or a teacher's aide. And my dad ended up working for the State Department of Education in Georgia. So I kind of come from an education family. Is your parents educators or business people, or both?
Well, now they are business people. Back when they started it, and they started it in their 20s, my mother was a high school history teacher. She was tenured. They lived in central New Jersey in a lovely town. My father at that point was a business analyst at AT&T, which was the largest employer in the United States. He had received his PhD in statistics and had taught at the college level. So both of them were in education, and they wanted to solve a problem. And my mom saw in the classroom that so many students were falling behind. They also wanted to take control of their destiny. They wanted to be in business for themselves. They saw the American dream potential, and then they took a leap of faith. Now, my grandmother on my mother's side, of course, both grandparents were Depression era grandparents. So when my mother said, well, I'm going to be quitting my tenured position as a teacher, I think my grandmother was a little bit beside herself. She probably did some more rosaries for my mom than my other aunts and uncle. That said, it worked out well. So all good there. I will say, though, going back to the other about trust and family, I think the key too is, especially now that the world is so interconnected, having folks like yourself, because you are a coach, you help guide business folks. There are different forums. So I know you shared that you were in South Dakota right now. In 2019, I actually spoke at the Prairie Family Business Convention. And so there are a lot of different, depending on where you are, organizations for family businesses, because some of the nuances of family businesses are unique. And then, of course, consultants and dare I say, even therapists can help with dynamics to make sure that compartmentalize, who am I speaking with right now? Is this my mom? Is it the co-founder? Is it a fellow shareholder, board member? Is it my boss? So you have to really work through all of those systems, which can be very complicated. And unlike a non-family member, when you leave work at the end of the day, they're still your family. So you can't unload on them either. So it does take a lot of discipline, respect, and a lot of work on yourself and each other.
Yeah, and thanks for chiming in on that, because that is a topic that I think is foundational. So thanks for sharing that. I want to shift a little bit, Anne, and talk about, you mentioned earlier that what your parents did was they saw a problem and this is business 101. Find a problem, solve it, and then you have people that will either pay for it or want to be involved with it. And so they did that. Let's go big picture for a little while here. And we could kind of talk a lot about things, but let's look at education in general. And I guess the first thing I would love to do with someone like you is just kind of ask, how do you define education? And I don't even know if that's an answerable question, but it's something I jotted down in my notes when I was just reading your info and doing a little bit of research. I'm going, I'd love to know how Anne defines education. And then we're going to get a little bit deeper into what's going on currently in the world, what's happening with how we educate and what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. But education. What is education to you?
Education is fundamental learning. Education continues after you're out of school. Education is growth and development. Education is a specific field. It's also learning about yourself internally and then externally the world and fellow humans, fellow humanity. So education at the core is truly the way to make anything possible. With education, you can solve problems. With education, you can think for yourself. With education, you can make your dreams a reality. With education, the world is bright.
Yeah, what was so cool, I didn't know quite how to ask that question, but you just gave like the highlight reel clip that we'll take from this episode and use. That was so good. And and so anyway, that was excellent and had so much there. So having said all that, which sounds extremely hopeful, and there's a lot of light in what you just shared, what are some of the challenges that your parents faced way back then? And then we'll probably also talk about what are some challenges with education. We're using that big broad word that we're facing now. And you could either take either one. We can go back today. From my perspective, we're probably dealing with the same challenges, but either or, whichever one you want to take and discuss.
Sure. So let me step back for a moment. Within Huntington Learning Center, we're K through 12 tutoring and test prep. And what that means is we have test prep programs, which are SAT, ACT, state tests, specific tests like an AP exam. And then tutoring, it's learning center, which is specific skills. So think verbal, think reading, writing, phonics at a fundamental level, math, study skills. So within Huntington, the challenges that my parents saw and their colleagues in the 70s saw 44 years ago are the same as they are today. The modes in which it's delivered may be different. Now, in the beginning, it was carbon paper. No, we're not old enough to have a stone and chisel, but we did have carbon paper. Today, we use Chromebooks. Who knows what we'll be using in 40 years? That said, students were missing fundamental skills. They were missing reading. They were missing reading comprehension, phonics. They were missing those core skills that then you need to build upon. So how did that happen? Well, teachers are excellent people. They want to help each student. That said, the classroom may have 15, 20, 25, 30 plus students in the classroom. And the teacher has to teach a certain curricula throughout the year and has to move on. Now, there's an individual student in that classroom. And let's say that student's dog passed away and the student was really sad for a certain concept in the classroom, and that student turned off. That student lost that concept. Now, maybe that student is very charismatic and could really overcome it in certain ways, but at some point, that concept that was lost will catch up to that student. And that's where Huntington comes in. What we do is we start with an academic evaluation, which is a battery of tests. It's a few hours in length, and we pinpoint exactly where the student is functioning. We pinpoint the strengths and weaknesses, and we build on those strengths, and we really, really build on those weaknesses. So that student, when he or she comes to Huntington, may actually be 2 grade levels behind. Now, because we're working at the student's pace, we can make sure that we deliver the instruction as the student needs it. So we don't have to meet a deadline. We have to make sure that the student understands it. So then we build those skills, which then in turn builds confidence and motivation. So that's most of our students are that. That said, because we're individualized, we help a lot of students who are enriched. So a student who's at grade level, who's bored in the classroom, again, the teacher has to teach to the middle, right? Because you're going to have some who are like, I understand this, and some who are completely confused for different reasons. And so that enriched student, we can help and move them from algebra to geometry to calculus and at that student's pace. So that's the really neat part about what we do. So that challenge that we see is the gaps in skills. And within a short period of time, we can build and we can shorten those gaps and we can fill in those gaps to make them then successful in and out of the classroom.
Yeah, it's been one of the thoughts that came to my mind as you were talking about it, Anne, was it's been a long time since I've been in elementary school. I'll just go ahead and say that. But I was blessed to come from a pretty solid, not perfect, but solid family environment. You know, I got a breakfast before I came to school, you know, and didn't have chaos when I got home and different things like that, which all that plays into it. Like you brought up the example of, you know, a child's dog passing away or just something that sets them back. And one of the things I recall, and I don't think I was the smartest guy around, but I seem to always be able to kind of stay in the upper range, which I think you just automatically put yourself in a position to keep going along and succeeding well if you can kind of be in a public school environment, maybe the upper X percentile. But I recall, and I've got actually some faces that are coming to my mind from almost 50 years ago, of people that just got a little bit behind early on in the process, first, second, third, fourth grade, and just never seemed to catch up. And I don't think these people were not smart or anything like that. It was just maybe circumstances or something like that. And I love what you said. And, you know, being I'm one that can ask a lot of questions, and I don't want any of my questions to be critical of teachers or anything like that. I might at times question the system, because I think the system that we've got of government education, we can always look to improve upon. But the goal of it is to try to make education available to everyone. But what is something that can be done maybe at the macro level? I know we're looking at micro, and you said that you do individual things for students, but what can be done at the macro level, big picture, to keep Sally or Joe in first, second, third, fourth grade from just getting a little bit behind, and then that gap just keeps growing year after year after year? I mean, got any ideas like that? If you could solve this would be pretty big deal, I guess. What are your?
I think I would get a Nobel Prize.
You would, yeah. So we might be just casting a big net of like, this would be kind of, and if everyone can kind of step into one of y'all's facilities, that would be great. But like you said, teachers have 20, 25, sometimes more in the classroom, and they have to try to manage all of them, keep them moving along. So any thoughts on solutions, big picture solutions?
Well, big picture solutions within education have to go down to that individual student. So we can look above the canopy, the macro level, and we can look at the framework of it and look at different testing opportunities, be it an SAT, an ACT, a PARCC test, all the different tests that are out there, so we can look for trends. That said, it has to go back to that student, and it has to go back to building that self-esteem, that confidence, because quite frankly, we see this every day where a student won't make eye contact. A student has never had a teacher or maybe anyone ever compliment them or say, great, hard work, good job. And then all of a sudden that student is seeing, wow, maybe I can do this. Maybe I'm not dumb. So yesterday I was in a meeting and a franchisee said, perception is really my reality. And I thought that was such a great quote. And I know it's a quote that's used many times over, but it is true. It's what we perceive sometimes does become our reality. So at that macro level, in terms of education, again, I think the 60 minutes, I think we're going to need way more time, Tim, for that. But it really goes to, okay, is this the problem we want to solve? So the education issue, let's say, that student who has no self-esteem, who has fallen through the cracks, who years ago we called it a failure chain model. That was in the 90s. It was a big campaign. We saw that the customers thought that was a little too aggressive, so we've softened over the years. That said, students do struggle. Maybe we don't call it failing anymore in in this day and age. That said, students do fall behind. That said, just because that student falls behind doesn't mean that student's always going to be behind. So as you were looking at the 50-year student heads coming up in your mind, where are they today? Hopefully they were able to move forward and all that. So the problem that has to be solved in your question would be, well, at the macro level, how do we help these students? And then what we have to do is we have to get really smart people in a room, some people who are in the industry. And I always like to bring people who aren't in the industry because they might think differently. And they might be able to, again, out of the box type of analysis, and then problem solve and say, okay, let's brainstorm. How can we fix this? How do we test it? And then you roll it out. The landscape within education isn't as simple or binary as a problem could be solved that simply. That said, I think that's the key with public-private partnerships. And within Huntington, we work with districts, we work at the state level, the federal level, and with the local parent, of course, to help the student and help many students. As my goal would be to have as many Huntingtons as possible, because that means that we can help more students. Education is critical to the future, and the more folks can think and can read and have critical thinking and be able to make decisions for themselves, the better we'll be.
Yeah, and in answer to sort of the question you posed, sometimes we don't know how people end up. It's like, I don't know the face of the classmate that was struggling to read out loud in third grade, and then shortly thereafter they were moved to another class, and sometimes we don't know. The good thing is that people can reinvent themselves. And, I know story after story of people that, when I move to the middle school or when I move to high school, I'm changing, I'm doing something different, or college or beyond. So that's good. One of the things we do here is we talk about redefining success. That's kind of a big underlying theme to all that we do. And sometimes, and it's with the guest, we ask about some event or something that occurred. And in a while, I'm going to ask how your business and organization has dealt with the world that we've seen since early 2020 and all that's gone on there, because I'm sure it's had an impact. It's had an impact on everyone. But I actually had that redefined success pop into my head when we were talking about the service that you provide to children, because I think that in overall big picture, public education has a goal to provide an education to everyone. And I think there's great merit in that. They do the best that they can most of the time, but to provide an education for everyone is almost, I don't want to say it's a losing battle. It's a very difficult thing to do because we're talking about a bunch of individuals. It seems as if one of the things your organization does is steps in and helps people redefine success, because they've been kind of defined. And you notice I don't even like to use the word failure, because sometimes it's an opportunity for someone to maybe take the tutoring and not move out, but complement what's going on with that education system. So anyway, do I have that right? I mean, am I thinking right on that? Is it,
Yes.
am I just trying to weave in the theme of the show here?
No, you're absolutely right. So I'm so honored to be on your show because that's what we do every single day. We redefine success, we make miracles happen, and we make sure that the student learns as the student needs to learn. There are many different ways to learn. The federal law, there's something called a free appropriate public education. Every student, K through 12 student, is entitled to that free appropriate public education. And so within that, that's good. It's appropriate. It's what needs to happen. That said, in the classroom, like we've been talking about, there are lots of students. So just because your report card or now the portal that your school's in says one thing, you are not a C or a B, or some schools don't use grades anymore. So however they define it in their local area, you are the person. So you have to find what is right for you. And so sometimes it means stepping back and saying, okay, let me try it a different way. Now, you can't do that, let's say, if you're a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon, but in many instances, you can think of it a little bit differently. So we do redefine success, and we do that with a very formulated way. We're prescriptive and diagnostic, and we start, as I shared earlier, with that evaluation. So then we create a customized learning plan for the student, and we can then share with the family, this is how many hours it's going to take to get your student to grade level or beyond, whatever the goal of the student is. So let me just ground that for a moment. So in 50 hours of tutoring, so that's a little more than a work week, our students on average will go up over 2.1, 2.2 grade levels in reading and math. So that means in a little more than a work week, we can move a child up over 2 grade levels. That's on the tutoring side. On the test prep side, on average, our students go up 5.4 points on the ACT and 229 points on the SAT, which our 2019 students on average received $71,000 worth of scholarship opportunities on average. In aggregate, it was like 187 million. So we truly are redefining success, and we are changing the trajectory of that student in school and then out of school, because what they might not have thought they could accomplish because of limiting beliefs or mindset, now all of a sudden they can, and maybe they can accomplish more. Many of our students who have their reach schools, and for those who don't have students or kids who are going to college, that's a school that is beyond what you think you can get to. Many of our students, those reach schools, become safety schools, which is just tremendous. And it's because we build those skills, confidence, and motivation. It's not cookie cutter. It's all individualized for the student. So I think you didn't weave it in. This is perfect. This is what we do every single day.
So what's interesting, something just came to mind as we were talking here, is that you've got multi facets to what you're dealing with. You obviously, we've already discussed the family business and the headquarters or the operation that you have, but you also are franchised, and then you also have the students that we just discussed. I think, especially for our audience, there's probably people that are intrigued by the by the aspect of what we do for students or what you do for students. But let's talk briefly about the model, which is the franchise model. First of all, I had a conversation. I don't know when it's going to air, but it was about a month or so back with me on the show with someone who kind of helps with franchises and helps people set them up. But talk about what the decision process was like. And I'm guessing they made the decision to do franchise model prior to 8 years ago when you joined the company. But what was part of that decision for expansion and growth related to franchising? And then talk a little bit about what that person needs to be like that would want to have a franchise for Huntington.
Great question. So between 1977, when Eileen and Ray Huntington, my parents, founded Huntington Learning Center, to 1985, they grew from one center to 18 centers in New Jersey, Philadelphia, New York, so that corridor, that New York metro area. After they had opened 18 centers and they had 2 kids, they said, we have a model, we have systems, we have procedures, it works, and we need to scale. And how do we scale? And so they thought franchising was a great option. So we began franchising in 1985, so 36 years ago. And it's been fantastic. Of course, the Great Recession in 08, 09 affected us just as it did everyone else in the world. That said, Huntington's a great model to franchise, because within franchising, the slogan is, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. So our franchisees in their local markets can make an impact. They can really fulfill our mission, which I shared earlier, which is to give every student the best education, and our vision, which is world-class student results and franchisee profitability. So we started franchising in 1985, and we see it as a great opportunity to help more students across the country, to help individuals come in and be in business for themselves, that entrepreneurial spirit, but to limit their risk a bit because they're with a proven system. And that individual could be from a lot of different areas in life. The most fundamental key, that individual needs to like kids. We deal with children. Of course, there are certain qualifications from a financial standpoint and work standpoint, and they need to be a U.S. citizen, and there's some other stuff. And we have a great team, a great franchise development team that helps guide the individual along the way. And also we work with a lot of different franchise brokers as well. So the individual needs to like kids, want to make a positive impact in their community, and want to open a business. We are a business, which means you have to understand marketing, you have to understand profit and loss, you have to understand budget, you have to understand operations. And we help with all of that. We have tremendous support. So that's it in a nutshell, Tim.
Yeah, and one of the things you brought up, and one of the things we attempt to do here, is be extremely transparent about the great times, and then also help learn about what goes on when times are tougher. You brought up that, there was some challenges during whatever we call the 2008. I've been very candid about what all happened with our companies and businesses. We usually discuss it. And whatever you're comfortable sharing, I would love to hear. Listen, you got franchise, you got locations all over the businesses are dependent upon, people being paid and all that. I'm sure a lot of the independent franchisees took a hit, and some probably folded and all. But can you give maybe a little bit more of what you saw and what you learned through that time? Because I know many people took quite the beating and haven't recovered. But many people use that, and for me, it was 5, 6, 8 years in the making, that it has made me better today than I was during that time. So maybe even frame it that way. What did you guys learn? What was the beating that you maybe took, and what is it doing to help you now, especially since we've just recently gone through another interesting challenge that we'll talk about shortly?
Yes. So there were a lot of lessons learned from that. Now, remember, at that point, we had already gone through the gas crisis. Students still came to Huntington, even though, you could only get gas on certain days or drive on certain days. So we had been through different crises. The Great Recession, one of the trends we saw, the franchisees who did close their doors, for the most part, were new franchisees who didn't have a full belief in what they were doing because they were so new. You have to see the results in your center. And with that, it's also that new franchisee who may not have had the roots in the community, i.e., the relationships with the schools, the relationships with the teachers, the relationships with fellow business owners. So you need to cultivate that network. So the lessons learned were very, very deep. And what we saw was, how do we move as many fixed costs over to variable costs? So the main fixed cost in our situation is rent, right? So you have to pay your rent. So before the recession, the Great Recession, our square footage was 2,500 square feet, give or take. Some were more, some were a bit less. So what we did was we said, what is the least amount of space you need to run a Huntington Learning Center? And as the franchisor, we opened a few locations with smaller square footage. So now on average, our square footage is about 1,400 square feet. For anyone who's interested in all this stuff, there's something called a franchise disclosure document. All this stuff's in there. Item 19 shows system averages. It's a big document. So it's not light reading, but go to item 19 and it goes into it. So on average, our square footage is 1,400 square feet. So that drastically changed that fixed cost. In addition, we changed some of the staffing models. So if you're a new center, guess what? You have no children unless you bring your kids into Huntington. So we created a staffing model that you can dial up staff. So instead of having full-time staff at first when you have 0 children, how do you make it part-time? And then depending on how many students you have in the center, then you either dial it up or dial it down. And then once you get to a critical point, then you need to bring on more staff. So that was moving to fixed cost to variable costs. The rent's not variable, but it moved it down, the fixed, and then moved that fixed of the staffing to variable. So those are 2 examples of what we learned through the Great Recession.
Yeah, that's good. All right. So with those 2 items, let's fast forward to, early 2020 and an event that I don't think any of us saw coming. What preparation did you go through in 08, 9, 10, 11? Was that helpful? Were those adjustments helpful? Do you think they made a difference when all of a sudden we were in this unique time that was a little bit different? We'll talk about maybe some other impacts, but did that help? Because I know it helped me to go through what we did in 08, because not that I was prepared, but we were in much better position. What was it like for Huntington?
So I wouldn't think that they're parallel in that. So just a little bit background. I became president in October of 2019. So I was a fresh president of Huntington Learning Center.
Yay!
The world changed overnight in March 2020. And my parents were down in Florida. They were hanging out. So I was like, okay, what do we do? So we rolled up our sleeves, and of course you learn from everything that happens in the past. That said, we were, prior to March 2020, we were solely in person, right? So that means our students had to go to a Huntington Learning Center. We didn't offer online tutoring. So that was the main problem we had to solve immediately, which we did. and I'm very proud of the team and how we accomplished it. So we started planning in mid-February when it started to rumble. And I started having daily meetings with my management team every day at 5 o'clock. And as the days got a little bit more doom and gloom, I would ask, "What's your redundancy plan? Who knows this? Who's cross-trained? How do we accomplish this? How do we accomplish that?" Then it became more, oh gosh, there are going to be mandates in certain states that are going to close our doors. We need an online option ASAP. It has to work. So it was really triage. It was 24/7, basically camped out at our main office until the governor told us we couldn't be there. I had a skeleton crew with me, not camped out all night long, but I had a skeleton crew until the day the governor said you can't be in the office anymore. And we were ready. We were like, we're going to do this. If there are blips, we're going to figure it out. And that's one of the great things about franchising. We have a very strong franchise network. And I was on the phone with franchisees all day long. Now we have franchisees in Seattle, for example, and those cases happened before they moved more towards the East Coast. So that gave us a bit of a runway because we were problem solving with those franchisees. And we were able to deliver an online solution. We were able to put our curricula, that for the most part is pen and paper, pencil and paper, we were able to put that online. Is it perfect? No, in terms of what it looks like. Does it work? Yes. And the results we're seeing with students, and we're starting to release this, is absolutely tremendous. We're seeing that online students and hybrid students, so a student who attends in person and online, is actually outperforming a student who attends in center. And I can explain our theory on that and the findings in a moment. So 2020, March 2020 was extremely different from the Great Recession. And it was because it was a complete transformation of our business model. With the Great Recession, we changed critical components of the business model, meaning the staffing and the square footage. That said, we did well because families, not well, but we survived, I should say. We survived in 08, 09 because families understood the investment of education and saw the results. And the centers that were in communities that had those roots were able to move forward. With the pandemic, it was a different beast. It was one where we had to really think outside the box and completely revolutionize our business model overnight in terms of our offerings, which we did. So should the door physically close, a student could continue virtually. And it was a lot of sleepless nights. It was a lot of 2 a.m. calls with attorneys. It was daily emails I sent to the entire system of 4,000 plus people, giving them real-time update in terms of what we're doing. It was changing our weekly calls to be COVID focused calls and go through lessons learned. It was meeting with our different councils and boards to make sure we were aligned. And if we weren't aligned, how do we get aligned? What do we have to do? Franchising's all about different documents. So we didn't have online in our franchise agreement. So we had to create an amendment to the agreement really fast. And so we worked together, and I think we were able to get stronger than ever before because we have a really strong network of people and a really strong network of a community.
How many states, or I guess states might be the best, are y'all primarily U.S. based, or y'all U.S. based?
At the moment, we're U.S. based,
Okay.
And we're in 42 states. We have roughly 300 locations.
Wow. So 300 locations in 42 states. And one of the things that a lot of us observed with business, and I was coaching and working with people all over, is that I don't want to say the rules were different totally in different places, but the rules were different in different places. There were some places that were going on full shutdown, some places that
Mm-hmm.
were, not to be inflammatory, they were ignoring. Anyway, it was just a wide spectrum there. Did you put some things in place? And obviously these are franchises, but did you have to put some policies in place at the corporate level that were adhered to for legal reasons, for safety and all of that they had to adhere to? Or did you allow people to do things based on the local issues? What talk about that challenge, because that seems to be fairly difficult to maneuver.
Yes, well, in the early days of the pandemic, my attorney was on speed dial because we wanted to make sure we did what was right.
Mm-hmm.
And you are right. Franchises, they're independently owned and operated.
Mm-hmm.
So we, from day one, even before in February, when we were starting to, I want to say role play, if we have to go remote, if we have to do this, if all that stuff. We really looked at the guidance of the CDC, of the local government. Now, our main office is in New Jersey. New Jersey is very different than our centers in Florida. It's just a different governor type. And so we had to be aware of that. So every single correspondence I wrote, every time I spoke, colleagues spoke, it was make sure you're adhering to your local guidelines and to the CDC guidelines. Things changed rapidly. At first it was 3 feet, then it was 6 feet. Then of course our marketing department had to come out with marketing so that families knew. We had to totally change our website and all of our collateral because all of a sudden we were offering online. And I didn't even get into the other programs we created last year because we saw a need, and we rolled out a whole host of different programs to help students, families, and we even created a B2B product. So it was really important that the local center in their local community followed those guidelines. Things were changing.
Yeah, and one of the things I kind of have this mind. I'm an engineer by training, but then I could be fairly optimistic, sometimes almost Pollyanna-ish optimistic. But early on in the pandemic, I was watching clients lose massive amounts of revenue. We were in survival mode. I think you used the term triage at one point to describe what went on back in '08. But I must admit, I've been extremely impressed with how so many people have come through. I could say in a lot of ways, but specifically business. And you mentioned some already, but what's really impressed you? Can you think of one of your franchise owners that did something that was so unique and creative? Y'all went, wow, or anything like that. What's impressed you? You're a problem solver, and this was like a problem that, well, first of all, I don't want to say you were in your element, but it sounds like you jumped in and had it. But what impressed you throughout all of this process the last year and a half?
What impressed me is that we not only survived, we're thriving today. Our revenue numbers are at or exceeding 2019. So that's what has impressed me. It's also impressed me that we as a team, we've worked together so well. There were some silver linings. We saw some things that we thought, wait, what does that mean? So by being remote, there's extreme transparency in terms of what you're doing, what you're not doing. So we were also able to go in and fix a lot of things that, well, they weren't right at that moment. So it also gave us an opportunity to change our org chart, if you will. So in terms of what's impressed, I'm really impressed with the whole network, how we came together. Now, I'm not picturing it as rainbows and unicorns because it sure was not that. That said, we have come together and we're stronger for it. Triage was definitely 2020. And you were just talking about revenues and everything. My CFO, who actually retired after 24 years earlier this year, he and I and the executive team, so my parents, we were looking at models, financial models of what happens if there's zero revenue, what happens if there's 50%. So it was a very eye-opening moment, one where you have to also realize it's not about me, it's about, not meaning Anne, but me, the person. It's about what is best for the company. And in my role, I feel that it's important to protect and grow the brand. And sometimes some of the decisions that have to be made are extremely tough. And I don't take it lightly. There were a lot of sleepless nights in terms of certain actions I had to take as president, and it doesn't go lightly. So with that, I'm very impressed in terms of how we came together and how we're not only surviving today, we're thriving. And we have been able to help so many students in such a time of uncertainty, that they knew that they could rely on Huntington. So we also created more webinars, which are free to the public, on topics that were about mental health. That they were about how do you work with students at home who may have ADHD. They were about dealing with different falling behind, with mindset, so we partnered with different psychologists, with different organizations to really educate the audience, which was excellent. And then you also asked about different franchisees. Well, within franchising, it's not so much creative because you want the franchisee to follow the system. That said, really great ideas come from the field. And there's one idea that came from a West Coast franchisee who is a mom, and she called me up and said, I really don't want to be just teaching my son every single day. I want to be the mom. Here's what I'm thinking. What about some sort of a academic teacher coach who can help with organizational skills? And we created an academic coach program, which is 2 30-minute check-ins with a tutor. And a lot of folks who have layered that on their actual program to help with executive functioning skills, organizational skills. What assignments do you have this week? Are you ready for the test? So she had a problem. She said, I want to be mom. And I said, okay, how do we make you mom? and we talked and we made her mom.
That's a great success story, especially in light of all that went on. Yeah, it was interesting. You were talking about strategy and talking about the financial models. I used to, definitely because of my background from '08, when I worked with a leadership team or executive leadership team, we would go through strategic exercises where we would have discussions about what happens if revenue drops by 10%, by 20%, by 30%. And we would do this, I did this in 2015, 16, 17. Never in my wildest thinking that I would need to, with a client, discuss, okay, let's talk about what happens if revenue goes to zero and we're entirely shut down for 60 days. What do we do then? We never once thought about that. And there's so many things I'd love to ask, but you are now president of a business that's been in existence for approaching 50 years, 45 plus years. If I'm doing the math right, maybe I need math help. I don't know. But 40 plus years. You obviously have 42 states, 300 plus organizations. They're probably growing. You've got marketing, you've got all these things. And I think kind of one of my big last questions before we begin winding down a little bit is, what's the biggest challenge that Anne faces in her role as leader, president, whatever else you want to add to that? What's the biggest challenge you face? And if you're able to share, you're a problem solver, so you probably have an answer to it. If you're able to share how you address it and deal with it, what would that be? Because you're in quite the leadership role that I think some of us could learn from.
Thank you. The biggest challenge I have is time. We have so much we have to accomplish, and there just isn't enough time. I know that's that age-old saying, but it's true. That is the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is time. And so how you solve that is prioritization. What is the most important? Who's responsible for it? So that then becomes delegation. And over the past years, I've really learned how to delegate, how to rely on team members, have accountability, trust but verify, and all that. So my biggest challenge is time. In terms of if I was to add another challenge, it's also how can we help more students? How can we grow more? So again, my job is to protect and grow the brand. So there has to be integrity. There has to make sure that it's the Huntington way, but also how do we grow it? That takes time too. So time is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think that would probably be common for a lot of people. And one observation, I think a lot of us have had, maybe we've gained clarity in the last few years with all that's gone on what is the highest priorities versus what might have been just other stuff that we padded in. So anyway, that's
Right.
good. One of the things I noticed, and I want to ask this before we wind down, and I know there's so many other things we could discuss, but
Need more time, Tim.
yeah, maybe we all need more time, but we also have a limit here. You have quite a background in art and
Mhm.
philanthropy. It mentioned you were a curator and founder. Could you briefly talk about that? And then I've got one final question related to that
Sure.
before we wrap up. So talk about your art background.
Sure. So I studied art history. I worked in the art industry while I was in school and then after school. I've always been an art lover, if you will. And even when I was younger, I was collecting postcards, precious moments. I just loved collecting and loved putting things together. So art is a passion of mine. One of the great aspects of art is you can change your roles within it. So yes, I was day to day and early in my career. And then as I moved into Huntington, I made that not day to day, but more as a patron, philanthropist, collector. So I've been able to keep that passion and keep it in sync with what's going on within the art industry. I focus on contemporary art, which means it's anything from 1959 to today, and all different types of mediums, from NFTs to design work to paintings to digital and everything in between. So art is part of who I am. I don't think I could live without art. And that's going to have to be a full on topic for another day. I'm active in many different organizations, including the Guggenheim. I'm a co-chair of their Young Collectors Council, and I've graduated, unfortunately slash fortunately, into the International Directors Council. I'm very, very honored to be part of that Guggenheim family. And so I have fantastic relations with lots of artists, curators, writers, and folks who share the passion that I have for art.
Yeah, that's cool. There's one thing you brought up that I can't just leave this. You brought up NFTs and the digital space that's going on. We had an interview recently, and
Yeah.
we've got another interview coming up with people that are very heavy into that space. Do you think that all that's going on with NFTs, and we're not going to explain it for those of you that may not know what it is, look it up, but is it going to be help to the individual artist? Is this something that's going to finally put a lot of artists that we've used the starving artist term, is it finally going to put them in a position where maybe they can not be starving artists? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it all depends on what platform the artist used to create the NFT and how it's structured. I think it's great to be able to share within it. In Great Britain, they do have tax, and they do, when you're selling certain art, that it has to go back to the artist. So the model has actually happened with more tangible objects versus an NFT. I think NFTs have propelled us and have created tough conversations within the art industry and beyond. NFTs will move into different mediums, so they already have, but they will, and probably at a fast pace. NFTs also make sure, in terms of fraud, counterfeit, it helps in terms of the integrity, potentially some shady stuff that could have happened. NFTs make it extremely transparent as to who has it, where it is. So that documentation is strong. I see NFTs as part of the canon, not the full canon. And I think it will continue to complement the different mediums that artists work in. A plug for, I'm an associate producer on a film that is premiering this coming weekend
Hmm.
at the Hampton Film Festival called The Art of Making It. And it doesn't go deep into NFTs, but it does talk about the need for dialogue between different members within the art industry, which is so important and critical for, and you used it, that starving artist, that artist who really is just painting to painting type of work. So what makes one artist successful, the other one not? And it's similar with NFTs. What makes one NFT successful, one not? So NFTs will help in terms of transparency. It's a new medium.
Yeah, it's new and exciting and uncharted and all that. Our son's a photographer. I think he's recently minted a few NFTs, and so he's experimenting in that and all that. Final question, then we're going to do a quick wrap. How are, you say you've got a passion for art and education. How are those two related, and how are they different?
Well, they are completely related. That said, Huntington Learning Center is very specific in what we do, and I'm not going to change that business model. You can learn so much through art, be it with different types of therapies, be it with different learning disabilities, be it with creativity. So they are extremely complementary and so essential. Art education is critical for learning and for really creating that imagination for the young learner and then the older learner. So they are connected fundamentally. So I don't see them as different.
Excellent. And what a great conversation we've had. Let's just say that someone's listening in and they want to get more information. I guess there's a range of people here. They might be interested in finding out if there's a Huntington facility near them to check for their children, or we also have a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs and all listening in. They may have interest in the business opportunity that is Huntington, or I guess, where would you like people to go if they would like to connect with you or find out more or something like that? Where do you want to send them? We'll include it in the notes also, but just let us know.
Awesome. So you can go to huntingtonhelps.com. That's our consumer website. So if your child is struggling, if your child is enriched and wants more tutoring or test prep, go to huntingtonhelps.com. Huntingtonfranchise.com is for franchise opportunities. So if you're looking to go into business and to have that entrepreneurial spirit, definitely check out huntingtonfranchise.com. You can call 1-800-CAN-LEARN and we'll make sure that we get you to the right place. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Ann Huntington Sharma, and we'll make sure that we connect.
Excellent. Thank you, Ann. I gave you a little warning for this, but my final question for you, we're seek, go, create. I'm going to force you to pick one word that you put above the other two. So seek, go, or create. Which word you're going to pick and why? And that's our last question.
I feel like you could answer this for me because I've said the word many times, and based off of our conversation, create, hands down, no question, create, because that's how you cause something to exist, how you produce something, that's how you establish something. And once you cause something to exist, once you establish, produce, you can build anything, and anything truly is possible. That creates creativity, that creates imagination, that creates new business models and frames of thinking. So create.
Excellent. Thank you, Ann. What a great conversation. I know that you've enjoyed this if you've been listening in. So please share, rate, give comments on the platform that you're listening in or watching on. We love to hear from that. If it's something that we need to get back in touch with Ann, we'll definitely do that too and bring her into the fold. But thank you so much for listening. Again, share this. And until next time, new episodes every Monday. Until next time, continue being all that you were created to be.